Clarity by Dragonson, Chapter 3, Obscurity. Ruby sat idly in her history class, though her thoughts were somewhere else entirely. Primarily, she was focusing on figuring out how much coffee Professor Oobleck drank daily, because she was figuring there was no way he could move how he did without a semblance, which was her stick, darn it, or being hopped up on a heap ton of caffeine. He's totally hopped on caffeine, her sister muttered as her head swiveled, tracking Oobleck in his quantum leaps around the room. How much do you think he drinks? Normally quiet and considerate, Blake weighed in her own inquiry as she too found herself staggered by the man's energy. Too much, Weiss huffed out quietly as she and the class moved their heads in sync to Obelix's new spot. He should learn to control himself. Nodding to herself sagely, Ruby pulled the cookie out of a bag and took a nibble out of it. She munched softly before looking at her partner. Wah! The Harris gave her a withered glare. Want one? Ruby asked, holding the bag out. The glare turned to a growl. Now, Klaus, are there any questions before we continue? Pausing to let the class catch their breath, if not himself, Oobleck asked the googly-eyed group, gaining the girls' attention. How the hell was he standing on the ceiling? Actually, Professor, a student spoke up, could you tell us more about the assassins? What's the big deal behind them? That one nameless student spoke for all of them, and there was a chorus of agreement from others. Their curiosity had been piqued from the speech Ospen had given the day before, and the discussion had been a long time coming. Festering, Oobleck considered for even longer than that. Belaying his normal fanaticism, the teacher coolly surveyed the class from his perch on the ceiling before sighing. A moment later he sipped off the wall and in front of his desk. Very well, Oblique agreed, daring to defy gravity by not curiosity. I will tell you what I know about them. There seemed to be a buzz of excitement in the air as students anticipated a story that wouldn't put them to sleep. Team Ruby were not among the eager, having experienced the current reality before. Their interest was just as high, thanks to Weiss. They now understand the relationship of how they worked in Atlas, but not about how it had come to be this way, and leading to the most important question of all: why? According around the time the kingdoms were into existence, Ublik began contemplative behind the constant reflection in his glasses. Man was still coming to terms with their knowledge on the newly discovered dust. With this application, they now had an efficient way to combat Grim. Glasses wearing, Teach explained. This presented an opportunity for the people to build up walls which held the first cities. This allowed them precious protection and, more importantly, time. Time? John asked. Yes, time, Mr. Ark, but please raise your hand next time, Oblique answered. Time for further development uses for dust and create weapons to combat the Grim. Suddenly the man's voice seemed to become darker, but not everyone was fine with living inside the walls. The Faunus, Blake muttered. Correct, Miss Belladonna, Blake noted. But please raise your hand. The brunette nodded in understanding. They were forced in cages by humans who didn't understand what they were, and in some cases, people were scared. Well, I mean, if you were locked in cages, who wouldn't be scared? Yang mumbled. I wasn't talking about the Faunus, Miss Xiaolong. The coffee-addled man scolded. Please raise your hand. His eyes landed on Pyra, who had her hand raised. Yes, Miss Nikos. People were scared of the Faunus, Pyra noted adequately, trying not to show her own disapproval. Correct, the man responded. People were afraid of what they didn't know, but not everyone had this viewpoint. Some believed the Faunus were just like them and deserved to be free. either choosing to live within the walls or without, but on their own terms. This led to arguments between the two sides. The man paused for a second as if debating something. He finally spoke again, but there was something different in his voice, and it was during that time that it happened. What? Ruby asked, suddenly on the edge of her seat and invested solely on the lecture. Oblique looked up at her, his eyes unreadable, being obscured by lenses. Why? The first murder within the walls, Miss Rose. Clarity. Naruto alone, with his team, stood in front of a man with their heads bowed, face now torn, betrayed their degradation, but intimately familiar with the four. The man needed neither of these cues to interpret their humility. "We're sorry to disappoint you," Sakura mumbled, almost afraid to speak. "We should have been more efficient," Sasuke added to disguise their real feelings. The man didn't look up from his book as they kept their heads down, but they could still feel his neutral gaze hidden behind his own unique mask. "Did you neutralize the target?" the man asked casually, flipping a book. "Yes," Naruto responded. "Then it's all good, isn't it?" The masked man responded nonchalantly. "Besides, from what you said, the only reason you all revealed yourself was because Naruto was cornered." "That is correct, Sensei." Naruto nodded, bowing even further into the ground as if contemplating bashing his head against the floor if such an act would not be considered a display of emotion. "Then you did the right thing." The man smiled blithely behind his mask. "Yes, but Kakashi sensei," Sakura pressed. "You seem particularly riled up about this," Kakashi interrupted. "Did the council say something about little old me?" The tension of her bowed shoulders was as easy to read as his book. "Don't listen to those old cronies," Kakashi dismissed with a nonchalant wave. "Remember what I taught you all when we became a team. Those who break the rules are trash." He began promptly prompting them to complete his own idiom. "But those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash," the four teens uttered in tandem, monotonely as if reciting a tried pledge. Yet this was one lesson they regarded like a prayer. "Exactly." Behind the mask and book, Kakashi smirked. "But what if we are forced to abandon them?" Yet not all the team knew how to interpret such matters of the heart. Naruto asked this question that had been on his mind for some time, unnoticing of his team's unconscious reactions. Behind him, Sakura flinched as if struck, while Sasuke merely twitched and side blinked, wondering if he should feel worrying. "What if the situation calls for it?" he further probed. But having seen this coming for some time, Kakashi didn't seem surprised by the line of questioning from the blonde. Instead, he opted to lift his hand and lightly chop the boy on the head. "Baka!" Kakashi scolded with none of the bite the counselors had reserved for him. "Sensei?" Naruto asked, not particularly bothered by the chop, which was more in jest than an actual attack like he was used to. Unable to help it, Sakura stifled a chuckle at the display, but also knew that the tension had broken. "Still got a long way to go," Kakashi added with a humorous shake of his head. "I do too," the teacher thought sadly to himself, looking at his blond student and measuring his own failures against the socially stunted boy. "Now then," Kakashi started changing tracks, "I hear Itachi will be overseeing you for a while." "Hi," Sai responded for the rest of his team, who were each occupied with their own thoughts. Sasuke grumbled, unnecessarily proclaiming his opinion on the matter. "Oh, looks like someone's excited," the one-eyed man teased, elbowing the onyx-eyed boy. "As if," Sasuke growled, part of the act that they all now knew how to play, even the captain. "Ma, you say that, but you're acting a lot like the time I caught you." "Whoa!" Kakashi stepped back as Sasuke leapt from his prostration and attempted to hit the man. "Shut up!" he growled, no longer caring for propriety. "Oh, did I almost reveal a secret?" Duty done and game begun, Kakashi giggled before running off. I hate him. Sasuke scowled. You sound awfully defensive, Sai spoke. Did he catch you masturbating by chance? Sai! And Sakura scowled at the boy's chosen language, but her eyes then turned to Sasuke with a teasing grin. But did he? No! Sasuke denied, glaringly angry at his own teammates. Oh, Sasuke, don't be shy. Sakura giggled, not noticing or choosing to ignore the visible sign of irritation forming on her teammate's head. Yes, you shouldn't be shy, Sasuke. Sai agreed. I have heard Sakura commit the same act when I go to ask her questions. Sai! Shoe now on the other foot, soon to be in Sai's ass, Sakura screeched, but her face a shade of red that illuminated the dark room. What did I say? Not understanding his own blunder, Sai asked with all honesty as he wondered whether to grovel or flee. Oh, is that so? Not normally one to participate in such games, Sasuke found he could not resist and prompted his teammate with an eyebrow raised in misgivings. Yes, Sai continued, and many times it seems she is fantasized. Whatever further mortification he was about to blithely unveil was cut off from the powerful blow sent to his stomach. Though no longer distraught, Naruto merely watched the antics of his teammates with a tilted head. If any of this affected him, he wasn't showing it. Less than an outsider than the blonde Kakashi loomed in the hall, then turned away from the scene. He chuckled before coming to a somber bearing when thinking about Naruto. You're right, Baka-sensei. A long way to go indeed, Sasuke thought, remembering a different time. Clarity. Murder? A student asked weakly, but he was brave in comparison, for the rest of the classroom fell as silent as that act so long ago. Yes, Ublik responded, with his one-word answer giving away nothing behind the academic mask. But it was enough to get Ruby's mind working, implications starting to draw themselves into an even more dismal picture than before. While she fought against it, she could see and feel the same struggle happening in the minds of her neighbors. Prior to this, the only thing humans feared were the Grim, the bespectacled teacher explained. After all, they were the monsters that had prowled upon them for generations. Strange as it sounded to us now, the thought of killing another human had never even occurred until that moment. Or most likely, the inclination was buried beneath the social milieu. The man paused for a second. However, once the cat was out of the bag, so to speak, he needn't elaborate. They could put together the picture, though perhaps it would have been better if he hadn't. While their avid imagination continued to draw worse and worse images, the aftershock led to a great deal of paranoia within the city. He pressed on through the somber atmosphere, stoutly determined to remain objective. As it is today, the Faunus were the first to be blamed, but they were effectively proven innocent when another murder occurred the next night while the Faunus were being washed within their ward. Please, we scoffed with quiet deservedness. Blake glared at the girl for a moment, but opted to not make a comment lest she interrupt the flow. But with no known suspects, the town soon fell into chaos. Accusations flew, paranoia mounted, and trust was soon dismantled. And we all know that what is attracted when negative thoughts grow too strong. Grim. Grim happened. After enough had fallen to this man-made plague, it became clear the targets were anything but random. Oobleck lectured. Ren raised his hand. What do you mean, Professor? Doctor, please. But thank you for raising your hand. Oobleck nodded to the polite young man. It was clear that all those being killed were those who supported releasing the faunus from their ghettos. Figures, Blake scowled mentally. Such a blatant paralyzation gave rise to a new threat, the likes of which had been previously recorded. Civil war. But thankfully, from the brink arose a new grounds of Remnant. From within the darkness a light was born. Oobleck added with a dramatic flair, his normal gusto returning to color his cheeks. One person stood up and said that instead of focusing on trying to silence one another, the focus should be on trying to defeat the Grimm that were poised to overrun them, the first huntsmen. To this day, we do not know their name. The coffee addicted grunted, clearly dismayed by this. Some suggest he might even be a myth, but their words rallied all the people behind that cause, and soon enough a small group joined them. Along with the newly developed weapons, they managed to push the impending horde back. There was a buzz of emotion. The students, at the realization that they had heard the birth of the first huntsman, latching on to some of the latent caffeinated energy and whispered excitedly to one another. But one who was normally the epitome of such fretinism was oddly subdued because Ruby saw it differently. Neither was Blake fooled. She knew a bait and switch when she saw one, and the man had deliberately turned the course of the story. What had started out as the history of the assassins had turned it into essentially propaganda, while quietly sweeping the contention under the rug, just like it had been done so long ago. Had the story even been real? And for that matter, was any of this real? Or had they simply been led here all along? That's all for today, class. Clapping to get their attention, Oobleck announced the end moments before the bell rang. Next week, I want a paper on the first cities and their inherent value, which led to the creation of the kingdoms. I expect independent research, a final nail in the coffin to make them forget about the whole ordeal. There was a groan within the class as they all got up to leave. Ruby was about to exit along with the rest of her team, but paused at the door and turned to face the sparsely populated classroom. Professor, Ruby probed. It's Doctor, but yes, what is it, Miss Rose? The man asked, looking askance at the youngest student. Was that story true? While her voice was meek, she had dared to ask the question. Like Blake, she had noticed the abrupt shift of the story, but had said nothing as class had ended. Indeed, it is. Oobleck, confident and nod that quickly turned into a dither. His educator's constants not allowing him to blatant and omniscient to an extent. This addendum gave Ruby pause. What do you mean? Like I said before, historians aren't even certain the huntsman or huntress existed, though I am adamant that they did, and within their history there are many different versions about the birth of assassins. He explained that trying to condense a lifetime of research into a few words. Some say they arose in opposition of the huntsmen, others say they were a group of rogues that couldn't deal with the peace. But no one knows for sure? Ruby asked. No, Oblig nodded. However, there is one fact that remains constant throughout all different variants. What's that? Seeing the chance of a kernel of truth, like the pinprick of light at the end of the tunnel. Ruby leaned forward across the doctor's desk until she was practically crawling on top of it. Taking little note of this behavior, Oobleck remained stoic as he answered. They were born at the same time as the huntsman.